podcast, he's a friend of this show, you said the Jews killed JFK and that Israel wanted October the 7th to happen so that Israel, had a reason to take the land. Let's just discuss those two things. What do you mean the Jews killed JFK?
In case I just seen this guy for the first time, his name is Bilzerian. He is well known for his lavish lifestyle, like gambling and hanging out with beautiful women. Not just hanging out anyway. He sleeps with a lot of them and still keeps them around. He has a huge following on Instagram, about 31 million followers, and posts his lavish lifestyle of beautiful women on yachts and in beautiful places. Now, he left that life behind about a year ago, and he is back as a new man who is with just one woman, and says he realized that that kind of life didn't bring him happiness and that he has to focus on the things he likes most. Now, things like speaking about what the world needs to hear, and that a lot of people are afraid or even scared to talk about. And this brings us to the heated debate between he and Piers Morgan about the ongoing war between Israel and Palestine. Now, especially when Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, was killed by the IDF. Now, Bilzerian called Sinwar a hero and that he died for a just cause. So what's heroic about Sinwar's death? Piers asked Dan, and here is what he has to say.
Well, let's talk about some of that, because you've been very vocal about Israel in particular. Even when Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, was killed by the IDF, you were out lauding him as a hero. To most people, he's the despicable head of a terrorist organization that perpetrated on October the 7th one of the worst terror attacks in modern history. What's heroic about that?
Well, I think when you look at it in a vacuum, it's a very different picture. It's kind of like if I, raped your mother and I kicked you in the nuts 3 times and then you punched me in the face and everybody just wanted to focus on you punching me in the face. I think that would be a very different conversation than when you looked at it, the whole of what happened. And the whole of what happened was Nakba. That's where it started. You have 750,000 Palestinians that got displaced. And then you've got multiple, acts of terror, in my opinion, on Israel's side that would make October 7th look like nothing. So to me, I think it was a retaliation, and I think that Hamas is a resistance organization, and I think that Israel is a terrorist.
When did Israel kill 1,200 people in a...
Now, one can easily sense the hypocrisy of Piers. He didn't care or even put into consideration the thousands of lives that were lost since October last year, 2023, most of which were children and women. Homes were burnt down, the Palestinians were displaced, and that all this led to the retaliation of Hamas. All he talked about was the things that happened as a result of the retaliation of Hamas.
Well, you have, Nakba, there was, 15,000 people killed during Nakba. There was Sabra and Shatila, that was 3,500 civilians. Then you have 2014, they killed 1,500 civilians, 500 plus were kids. So any one of those days would have been much worse than October 7th, but nobody really talks about
those
that.
Didn't happen in a single day.
And October 7th is not nearly as bad as what they say.
Well, those didn't happen in single days.
Even though they didn't happen in a single day, they actually happened.
Days, as you know.
Well, you have, Sabra and Shatila, that was 3,500 people, so that was basically 7 October 7ths. And October 7th, I think the numbers get inflated a lot too, because you're not taking into account that it was only 650 civilians, and there was the Hannibal Directive that was employed, and the Hannibal Directive is when the military is basically killing civilians so that they aren't taken as hostages. And that had to be hundreds of people, so I would argue that it was less than 500 civilians that were killed, and to me, that is much less than what the Israelis have been doing to the Palestinians.
But you said
even the year when October 7th happened, they had killed hundreds of Palestinians that year. It was the bloodiest year for kids. So that was a reply to what had been happening.
But when you say that October 7th wasn't as bad as people have said,
so all that was Israeli propaganda. And the problem is Israel has continued to lie and lie and lie, and they've been caught lying. And they're the only ones that have actually been caught red-handed raping prisoners. And they've done it, and the people that raped the prisoners were now heroes, and they got released, and there was nothing that happened to them. So I think it's very hypocritical to focus on things that they're doing and then try and blame them, on Hamas or the Palestinians.
It's interesting because,
it's just, to me, total bullshit. It's just Israeli propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, listen.
See, the annoying part of the whole thing was how Piers lied and tried to defend the Jews' horrific and atrocious deeds they had done in the past by spewing false things about the terrors perpetrated by the Israelis. And it's quite astonishing how Dan pointed out Piers' lies and made him small on his own show, on his own podcast. Now, from the way Piers talks, it's like he's pro-Israel, and it's like they've got some leverage on him. That's why he sees nothing wrong about the evils of the Jews and their supremacy.
Podcast, he's a friend of this show. You said the Jews killed JFK and that Israel wanted October the 7th to happen so that Israel, had a reason to take the land. Let's just discuss those two things. What do you mean the Jews killed JFK?
So I believe that was an Israeli Mossad operation, and they've committed multiple false flag attacks. I mean, they've, the USS Liberty, you've got the Lebanon affair. I mean, so they've got a history of doing this, and I don't think it's crazy to think that they were involved in that assassination, and that's the reason that Trump didn't want to, release those files. And I think clearly it had to be embarrassing. Otherwise, why wouldn't he want to release it? And that's the only thing that I could think of that would be embarrassing, because everybody from that time is pretty much dead by now. So it would make sense. I mean, they wanted to cut off, it's now AIPAC, but the Zionist, organization that was doing all the funding that should have been registered as a foreign entity. And, he wanted to register them under FARA. He wanted to, take away their ability to have nukes. And, they didn't like that. So I believe that they killed.
What he's trying to say was that the Jews didn't directly kill JFK, but they were accomplices to his death. Whenever they are being criticized by a leader, a president, or a group of people, they have a way of manipulating the US government to become an enemy to such people and eventually take them down. And what's so surprising about this was how Dan schooled Piers on the figures he quoted about the number of Israelis that actually died in World War II.
Feel a sense of victimhood, given that 6 million of them were killed in World War II by a genocidal monster in the Holocaust. Do you not understand why that might make Jewish people feel that, yes, they have indeed been victims?
Yeah, I mean, that figure's been revised, but, I believe that Jewish supremacy is the greatest threat to America, and I think it's the greatest threat to the world today. I truly believe that.
What do you mean the figure's been revised? What do you mean?
Well, they said that it was 4 million that died in Auschwitz, and then they said it was down to 1 million, so they've revised the figure.
Well, how many people? How many people do you think were killed in the Holocaust?
271,000 that died in Auschwitz.
How many do you think were killed in the Holocaust?
I don't know, but I would bet my entire net worth that it was under 6 million.
Again, I simply ask you, Dan, what's the motivation for making claims like that? What do you stand to gain by trying to diminish what happened in World War II?
I'm just answering your question. I mean, I'm a gambler, so if I think that something is a low probability, then I would bet on it. And I don't know for a fact, but the evidence all says that it was less than 6 million. I mean, just the mathematics don't work. Like, you can't cremate that many bodies. Like the whole gas chamber thing, it's a very ineffective way to kill people. So when people have researched this and they've done the due diligence, they said it's mathematically impossible.
You see, I'm sorry, but I just find
it's so irritating how Piers talked to defending the Jews, even though they've brought terror to so many people in the world. Dan went further and said, even though that figure has been proven to be exaggerated, the Jews have killed more Christians, way more Christians than that.
6 million were killed in
You said 12?
6 million were killed in the Holocaust. Or do you not believe that either?
Okay. I mean, Jews have killed far more Christians. Well, Jews have killed far more. Let's just accept the 6 million figure. Jews have killed far more Christians than that. I mean, it's not even close. If you look at the Bolshevik genocide, you look at the Holodomor, I mean, they've killed way more Christians. I mean, they basically invented the genocide. So, they deny the Armenian genocide. Israel denies that. They've lobbied the U.S. to deny that. I'm Armenian. They killed half of my people. So, and I'm not offended by that. If somebody questions that, it's not some crazy thing. I mean, Israel denies the Armenian Holocaust. Okay?
It sounds to me, Dan, like you do actually hate Jewish people.
Even though Dan was talking about the evils perpetrated by the Jews and uses evidences to support his claims, Piers seemed to be too blinded by the Jews and don't see anything wrong in what they have done, and instead said Dan hates the Jews and called him anti-Semitic.
Denies the Armenian Holocaust. Okay?
It sounds to me, Dan, like you do actually hate Jewish people.
No, I believe that Jewish supremacy is the greatest threat to the world today. I look at what they're doing in the media. They're pushing this transgender nonsense. I mean, and they did it in Germany. The first transgender clinic was opened by a Jewish guy. And I don't like this perversion pushed on our children. I don't like the fact that 9-year-olds are reading about homosexual acts. I don't like that drag queens are reading them in schools. I don't like that Kamala Harris wants to pay for sex changes in prison so that men can turn into women and women can turn into men. And I don't like the fact that he's putting in, men into women's prisons, male rapists into women's prisons because they identify as women. I mean, it's just nonsense. I don't like, men beating up women in boxing and sports. I think it's all nonsense. And I think it's leading to a degradation of moral fiber. And if
He's not blaming the Jews. He's only saying what they actually did.
this.
What do you mean they're pushing it? What are you talking about?
Well, I mean, they're controlling the media. I mean, the DEI is being pushed by BlackRock. BlackRock's execs are all Jewish. You look at where this is coming from. It's not a surprise.
Dan,
All the Disney execs are Jewish.
Dan,
They're pushing it on children.
right, do you accept, Dan, that you are just blatantly anti-Semitic?
Look, I have an issue with that term. I mean, I think the real Semites are the Palestinians. I mean, the DNA tests that they've done on the Israelis that are living over there, they're Eastern European Ashkenazi Jews. I don't even think they're actual Semites. They don't have ancient Hebrew DNA, which is why DNA testing is illegal in Israel.
But, I mean, you're literally denying their existence now. I mean, you are just a brazen anti-Semite, aren't you? You hate Jewish people. You hate Israel. You hate the state of Israel, its government, everything about it. You're blaming them you blame them in this interview for literally absolutely everything.
When you say, well, I think most of the problems today is caused by Jewish supremacy. I believe that.
It's kind of funny how Piers looks dumbfounded and has no concrete evidence to refute this guy. Anyways, that'll be all for this video. You can watch the full podcast by clicking the link in the description below.